Hashtag Part 1. The Arrival. The summer sun beat down on London's busy streets as James Chen stepped off the red double-decker bus near Buckingham Palace. The 23-year-old tourist from Vancouver wiped sweat from his forehead and pulled out his phone to check the time. 2:15 p.m. Perfect timing for the famous guard change ceremony. James wasn't alone in his excitement. Hundreds of other tourists crowded the sidewalks, their cameras ready and children hoisted onto shoulders for a better view. The atmosphere buzzed with energy, like a concert crowd waiting for the main act to begin. As he pushed through the crowd to get closer to the palace gates, James couldn't help but feel a bit annoyed. He had been planning this trip for months, saving up money from his part-time job at a coffee shop back home. The viral videos he watched of tourists interacting with royal guards had racked up millions of views. Now it was his turn to create something special. "Excuse me," he muttered, squeezing past a family taking selfies. His friend Mike followed close behind, already recording with his new camera. They had been travel buddies since high school, but this European adventure was their biggest trip yet. The royal guards stood like statues in their famous red uniforms and tall black bearskin hats. Even in the scorching heat, they didn't move a muscle. Their polished boots gleamed in the sunlight, and their rifles rested perfectly on their shoulders. James couldn't understand how they managed to stay so still in this weather. "This is going to be epic," James whispered to Mike, pulling out his own phone. A group of teenage girls nearby were trying to make one of the guards smile, striking funny poses and telling jokes. The guards stared straight ahead, completely ignoring them. James watched as they eventually gave up and walked away, giggling among themselves. An elderly British woman standing next to James shook her head disapprovingly at the girl's behavior. "Young people these days have no respect for tradition," she said to her husband. James overheard her, but didn't pay much attention. He was too busy thinking about how to make his videos stand out from all the others on social media. The crowd grew larger as the afternoon wore on. Tour guides with colorful umbrellas led groups of visitors past the palace gates, explaining the history of the royal family and the guards' important role. Some tourists listened intently, while others, like James, were more interested in getting the perfect photo. "Did you know these guards are actual soldiers?" Mike read from his guidebook. "They're not just here for show. They go through intense military training and everything." James nodded absently, more focused on framing his next shot. The sun was in just the right position now, creating dramatic shadows behind the guards. He'd seen hundreds of photos of Buckingham Palace before, but being here in person was different. The palace was massive, its cream-colored walls stretching what seemed like forever in both directions. Union Jack flags fluttered in the gentle breeze above the main gate. A young boy nearby pointed at one of the guards and asked his mother, "Why aren't they moving?" The mother explained patiently about the guard's serious duty to protect the palace. James listened while scrolling through his phone, checking how many likes his latest Instagram post had gotten. The heat was getting worse, and James was getting impatient. He had expected something more exciting, like the videos he watched online where guards would sometimes break their stance to shout at misbehaving tourists. These guards seemed completely lifeless. "Maybe we should try something to get their attention," James suggested to Mike, who was still filming. A couple of American tourists nearby shot him disapproving looks, but he ignored them. He was determined to get more than just another boring photo of a guard standing still. As the afternoon crowd continued to grow, street vendors appeared selling water bottles and ice cream. James bought a cold water bottle, quickly drinking half of it to combat the heat. He watched as other tourists came and went, all trying their own methods to get a reaction from the guards. Little did anyone know that James' growing frustration and desire for social media fame would soon lead to a series of events that would change his life forever. The empty water bottle in his hand would become more than just trash. It would become evidence in a case that would make international headlines. Hashtag Part 2. The Build-Up. The afternoon heat continued to rise as James Chen grew more restless. He had spent the last 30 minutes trying different poses next to the royal guard, but none of his selfies looked special enough. His friend Mike kept recording, hoping to capture something worth posting online. "Come on, man, do something," James muttered under his breath, staring at the guard's emotionless face. The guard remained perfectly still, his eyes focused straight ahead. The dark blue military ribbons on his red uniform showed he was a real soldier, but to James, he might as well have been a statue. A group of tourists from Germany stood nearby, watching James with disapproval. One of them, an older man with gray hair and glasses, stepped forward. "Young man," he said in careful English, "these guards deserve respect. They're not here for entertainment." James felt his face get hot, but not from the sun this time. "I'm just trying to get a good photo," he replied, turning away from the man. Mike lowered his camera slightly, looking uncomfortable. "Maybe we should move on," Mike suggested, but James wasn't ready to give up. More people gathered around, drawn by the growing tension. Some pulled out their phones, expecting something interesting to happen. A mother quickly pulled her children away from the area, sensing trouble brewing. The atmosphere had changed from tourist excitement to nervous energy. "You're going to get yourself in trouble," a woman with an Australian accent called out. She was standing with her tour group, their guide nodding in agreement. "These guards are trained soldiers, not street performers." But James wasn't listening. The more people tried to warn him, the more determined he became to get a reaction. He had seen so many viral videos of guards breaking their stance. Why couldn't he create one too? His social media followers would love it. Mike stepped closer to his friend. "James, seriously, let's get some ice cream or something. It's too hot to stay here." Sweat was running down both their faces, and Mike's camera was getting heavy. But James waved him off, his frustration growing by the minute. A nearby police officer started paying attention to the situation. She stood at a distance, watching carefully but not intervening yet. Her presence made some of the crowd step back, but James was too focused on the guard to notice. The guard stood motionless, looking straight ahead through all of this. His training was obvious. Not a single muscle moved despite the chaos building around him. His polished boots remained perfectly still, his rifle held exactly in position. The only movement was a slight breeze ruffling the black fur of his tall bearskin hat. "Look at him, just standing there like a robot," James said loudly, hoping to provoke a response. A few teenagers in the crowd giggled, but most people looked uncomfortable. An American couple shook their heads and walked away, the wife saying something about young people these days. Mike checked his phone nervously. "We're going to miss our bus to the Tower of London if we stay much longer." He was worried about his friend's behavior but didn't know how to stop him. The camera kept recording as James became more agitated. The empty water bottle in James's hand was getting crushed as he squeezed it in frustration. He had traveled thousands of miles for this trip, spent hundreds of dollars, and all he had were the same boring photos everyone else took. It wasn't fair. A palace tour guide speaking to a nearby group caught everyone's attention. "The Queen's Guard has been protecting the royal family for centuries," she explained. "Each guard is a highly trained soldier who has earned their position through years of dedicated service." Her words made some tourists look at the guard with new respect, but they had the opposite effect on James. To him, it was just another reminder that his perfect social media moment was slipping away. The police officer took a few steps closer, her hand resting casually on her radio. She could see the signs of someone about to make a bad decision. Around her, the crowd had grown larger, with some people sensing drama about to unfold. James looked at the crushed water bottle in his hand, then back at the guard. His mind raced with possibilities, each worse than the last. Mike saw the look in his friend's eyes and knew something bad was about to happen. "James, don't," he started to say, but it was too late. The next few seconds would change everything, turning a tourist's frustration into an international incident that would make headlines around the world. Part 3. The incident. Time seemed to slow down as James Chen made the worst decision of his life. The crushed water bottle felt light in his hand, but it would soon feel as heavy as his consequences. The summer air hung thick with tension as dozens of phones recorded what happened next. Without warning, James threw the empty bottle. It spun through the air, landing with a soft crackle at the guard's polished boots. The crowd gasped collectively, like a theater audience watching a horror movie. Mike's camera captured everything, his hands shaking slightly as he recorded. "Did you see that?" someone shouted. He actually threw something at the guard. The crowd's murmurs turned into a loud buzz of shocked voices. Parents pulled their children back, while others pushed forward to get a better view. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. The guard, Lance Corporal William Matthews, remained perfectly still. His face didn't show any reaction, but his eyes flickered briefly toward the bottle at his feet. He had served in Afghanistan before joining the Queen's Guard, and this wasn't the first time he had faced disrespect, but it was one of the most blatant. Two Metropolitan Police officers, who had been watching James' earlier behavior, immediately started moving through the crowd. Their bright yellow safety vests made them easy to spot as they approached from different directions. They had seen enough to know this wasn't just usual tourist mischief. "I got it all on video," someone in the crowd shouted, holding up their phone. Others were already posting their recordings online. Within minutes, the incident would start spreading across social media platforms. The hashtag Buckingham Palace incident would soon begin trending. James' moment of triumph quickly turned to confusion as he noticed the serious faces in the crowd. An elderly British woman pointed at him, telling the approaching police officers, "That's him. I saw everything." Mike lowered his camera, finally realizing how serious the situation had become. "It was just a joke," James said, his voice suddenly uncertain. The confidence he had shown earlier disappeared as the police officers got closer. He looked around for support, but even the teenagers who had laughed at his earlier antics were now backing away. The first police officer reached James while her partner secured the area. "Sir, I need you to stay where you are," she said firmly. Her hand rested on her radio as she positioned herself between James and any potential escape route. The crowd formed a wide circle around them, phones still recording. "I didn't mean anything by it," James protested, his voice getting higher. He looked at Mike for support, but his friend was staring at the ground, still holding his camera. The weight of what he had done was starting to sink in. The guard maintained his position, showing incredible discipline. Later, in the official report, Lance Corporal Matthews would be commended for his professional behavior. His only movement was a slight adjustment of his rifle, a motion so smooth most people missed it. The second police officer began asking nearby witnesses for statements. Dozens of people stepped forward, eager to share their videos and describe what they had seen. The Australian woman from earlier explained how she had warned James to stop. The German tourist nodded in agreement, adding his own account. "Your passport, please," the first officer said to James. Her tone made it clear this wasn't a request. James's hands trembled as he reached for his back pocket. The proud swagger he had shown earlier was completely gone now. Mike finally spoke up. "We're supposed to fly to Paris tomorrow," he said quietly. The officer looked at him, then back at James. "I'm afraid those plans may need to change," she replied. The seriousness in her voice made James's stomach drop. More police officers arrived, responding to their colleagues' radio call. The crowd had grown even larger, with tour groups stopping to watch the scene unfold. Tour guides were already adding this incident to their stories about tourist mishaps at Buckingham Palace. The water bottle still lay at the guard's feet, a piece of evidence in what would soon become an international news story. Palace security staff approached to properly document and collect it, treating the simple piece of plastic with the seriousness of any crime scene evidence. As James was led away by the police officers, the reality of this situation finally hit him. What he had thought would be a funny video for social media was about to become something much more serious. The headlines were already being written, and his name would soon be known for all the wrong reasons. Part 4. Immediate consequences. The police station's bright fluorescent lights made James Chen's head hurt. Or maybe it was the stress. He sat in a small interview room, staring at his reflection in the metal table. His tourist map of London lay forgotten in his pocket, next to where his phone used to be before the officers took it as evidence. "Would you like some water, Mr. Chen?" asked Detective Sarah Thompson, placing a paper cup on the table. Her tone was professional but stern. The excitement of Buckingham Palace felt like it had happened days ago, not just an hour earlier. Outside the interview room, Mike paced the waiting area. The police had taken his camera as evidence but allowed him to make phone calls. He had already called their hotel to explain they might miss checkout time. The receptionist's response made it clear this wasn't the first time they'd heard about tourists getting in trouble with the royal guards. "Let's go through what happened today," Detective Thompson said, opening a folder. Inside were printed screenshots from various social media posts. James felt sick seeing himself in some of the photos, his face angry as he confronted the guard. "Your actions have already gone viral," she added. The detective's computer showed new video clips appearing every few minutes. Tourist videos from different angles captured the moment the water bottle hit the ground. Some videos had already gained thousands of views. News websites were picking up the story, with headlines calling it an attack on Royal Guard. "I didn't think it was such a big deal," James muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. The detective raised an eyebrow and turned her computer screen to show him a news website. The headline read, "Tourist attacks Queen's Guard. Zero tolerance for royal security threats." In another room, palace security officials reviewed the incident footage. They noted how Lance Corporal Matthews had maintained his composure despite the direct provocation. His commanding officer had already been notified, and a formal report was being prepared for palace records. James's passport sat in an evidence bag on Detective Thompson's desk. "You'll need to surrender this temporarily," she explained. "Until this matter is resolved, you cannot leave London." The words hit James like a punch to the stomach. His return flight to Vancouver was in 5 days. Mike finally got through to James's parents on the phone. Explaining the situation was difficult, especially with the 8-hour time difference. "No, he's not hurt," Mike said, "but he's in serious trouble." He could hear James's mother crying in the background. Back in the interview room, Detective Thompson listed the charges: disorderly conduct, harassment of a Crown official, and littering on protected grounds. She paused to let each charge sink in. "These are serious offenses, Mr. Chen. The palace takes security threats very seriously." Outside the police station, journalists had already gathered. Someone had tipped them off about the tourist who confronted a royal guard. Camera crews set up their equipment, waiting for any statement from the police or a glimpse of James. "Your court appearance will be tomorrow morning," Detective Thompson continued. "I suggest you contact a lawyer." She handed James a list of local legal representatives who handled tourist cases. The paper trembled in his hands as he realized how expensive this mistake would become. Mike's camera footage played on a screen in the evidence room. Officers watched as it showed James's behavior getting progressively worse over the afternoon. The footage would make it difficult for him to claim it was just a momentary lapse in judgment. Social media comments flooded in from around the world. Some people defended James, calling it a harmless prank, but most expressed outrage. "These guards protect the royal family." One popular comment read, "It's not a game or a tourist attraction." James looked at the clock on the wall, 6:45 p.m. Just 5 hours ago, he had stepped off the bus at Buckingham Palace, excited about getting the perfect social media post. Now he sat in a police station, his passport confiscated, his vacation ruined, and his future uncertain. Detective Thompson returned with more papers for James to sign. "We'll keep you here until your lawyer arrives," she said. "In the meantime, I suggest you think carefully about what happened today. The royal guards may look decorative, Mr. Chen, but they represent centuries of tradition and vital security duties. Your actions showed disrespect not just to Lance Corporal Matthews, but to the entire institution he serves." Part 5. Legal Proceedings. The Westminster Magistrates' Court looked nothing like the courts James Chen had seen in movies. The building was old and serious-looking, with high ceilings and wooden panels on the walls. He sat nervously in his new suit, which Mike had helped him buy the evening before. His lawyer, Mrs. Rebecca Palmer, arranged papers on the desk in front of them. "All rise," called the court officer as the magistrate entered the courtroom. James stood quickly, his legs shaking slightly. The magistrate, a woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, looked through her papers before glancing at James over her reading glasses. News reporters filled the back rows of the courtroom. Their pencils moved quickly across notepads as they recorded every detail. James had already seen his face on several news websites. "Tourist faces court after Royal Guard incident," and "Buckingham Palace security breach. Tourists to face justice." "James Chen," the magistrate began, her voice clear and stern, "you are charged with 3 offenses: disorderly conduct, harassment of a Crown official, and littering on protected grounds. How do you plead?" The courtroom fell silent, waiting for his response. "Guilty, Your Honor," James said quietly, following his lawyer's advice. Mrs. Palmer had explained that showing remorse and accepting responsibility was his best option. The evidence against him was too strong to fight the charges. The prosecution lawyer stood up, holding a tablet computer. "Your Honor, we have video evidence from 17 different angles," he announced. The defendant's actions were clearly deliberate and showed complete disregard for both the guard's dignity and palace security protocols. The court watched several video clips, including Mike's footage. James couldn't bear to look at the screens. Seeing himself act so foolishly made him feel sick to his stomach. The magistrate's frown deepened as she watched the recordings. Lance Corporal Matthews sat in full uniform near the front of the courtroom. He had taken time from his duties to attend the hearing, showing how seriously the palace took the incident. His presence made James feel even more ashamed. Mrs. Palmer presented James's defense next. "Your Honor, my client is a young man who made a terrible mistake," she began. "He has no previous criminal record and is deeply sorry for his actions." She handed over character references from James's employers and teachers in Vancouver. The prosecution then revealed more evidence. They showed screenshots of James's social media posts from before the incident, where he had written about wanting to mess with the guards and make them crack. These posts made his actions seem more planned than spontaneous. Mike sat in the public gallery, watching his best friend face the consequences of his actions. Their planned European vacation had turned into a nightmare. Their flights to Paris had been cancelled, and their parents had to send extra money to cover the unexpected legal costs. "Mr. Chen," the magistrate said, addressing James directly, "do you understand the seriousness of your actions?" James stood up, his voice shaking as he responded, "Yes, Your Honor. I am truly sorry for what I did. I didn't think about the consequences or the importance of the guard's role." The court clerk brought more documents for the magistrate to review. These included reports from palace security and statements from witnesses in the crowd. Many tourists had come forward to describe how they had warned James to stop his disruptive behavior. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd gathered. Some were tourists who had changed their sightseeing plans to watch the proceedings. Others were journalists from different countries, ready to report on the outcome. The story had captured international attention. After what felt like hours, the magistrate prepared to announce her decision. James stood again, his heart pounding. Mrs. Palmer had warned him to be prepared for a severe penalty, given the public nature of his offense and the need to deter similar behavior from other tourists. "This court takes any interference with royal guards extremely seriously," the magistrate declared. "These soldiers perform a vital security function while preserving important traditions. They deserve respect, not harassment." She paused, looking directly at James before continuing with his sentence. The next few minutes would determine not just James' immediate future, but would send a message to tourists worldwide about the consequences of disrespecting British institutions and traditions. Part 6. The Guard's Perspective. Lance Corporal William Matthews sat in the officers' mess at Wellington Barracks, still wearing his ceremonial uniform. His fellow guards gathered around him, some just returning from their shifts at Buckingham Palace. The room buzzed with conversation about the incident that had now made international news. "Tell us again, Will," one of his colleagues asked. "How did you keep so still when that bottle hit your feet?" The other guards leaned in to listen. They had all dealt with difficult tourists before, but this case was different. William took a sip of tea before speaking. 8 years in the military teaches you discipline," he said quietly. His mind went back to his training days, and even further to his service in Afghanistan. When you faced real threats, a tourist with a water bottle doesn't shake you. Captain Richard Harris, William's commanding officer, entered the room holding a newspaper. The headline read, "Royal Guard's Professional Response Draws Praise." Below was a photograph of William standing at his post, looking every inch the professional soldier he was. "The palace has released an official statement," Captain Harris announced, drawing everyone's attention. He read from an official document. Lance Corporal Matthews demonstrated exemplary restraint and professionalism, upholding the highest standards of the Queen's Guard. The statement brought back memories of William's first day as a Royal Guard 3 years ago. The training had been intense, learning to stand perfectly still for hours, mastering the ceremonial drill movements, and understanding the serious security responsibilities behind the tourist-friendly facade. "Most people don't realize," William explained to a new guard who had just joined the unit, "that we're not just there for show. We're fully operational soldiers." He opened his locker, showing photographs from his military career, training exercises, combat deployments, and finally, his proud selection for the Queen's Guard. In another room, palace security officials were reviewing procedures. William's handling of the incident had become a teaching moment. Security footage played on screens, showing how he had maintained his position while allowing police to handle the situation. "This is exactly how it should be done," the chief of palace security commented. Lance Corporal Matthews showed that our guards can maintain tradition while ensuring security. The footage would be used in future training sessions for new guards. William's phone buzzed with messages from his family. His mother had seen him on the morning news and was proud of how he handled himself. His father, a former soldier himself, sent a simple text. "You did the regiment proud, son." The incident had sparked discussions about the challenges Royal Guards face daily. William thought about the thousands of tourists he'd seen during his service, most respectful, some silly, and a few, like James Chen, who crossed the line. The hardest part, William told his colleagues, is remembering that we represent centuries of tradition. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the palace in the distance. Every tourist with a camera sees us as entertainment, but we're soldiers first. Captain Harris called William to his office later that day. On his desk lay commendations from senior military officials and palace authorities. "Your restraint has set an example," the captain said. "You've shown the world what it means to be a Queen's Guard." In the barracks briefing room, senior officers used William's experience to update tourist interaction protocols. "We face a new challenge in the social media age," one officer explained. "People want viral moments, but we must maintain our standards." William thought about James Chen, now facing serious legal consequences. "I don't feel any anger toward him," he told a fellow guard. "He didn't understand what these uniforms mean, the responsibility we carry." His words would later be quoted in several newspapers. As evening approached, William prepared for another guard shift. He inspected his uniform carefully, every button polished, every strap perfectly aligned. The bearskin hat, weighing almost 2 pounds, sat ready on his locker shelf. "A lot of people will be watching today," Captain Harris noted as William prepared to leave. After the incident, tourist attention had increased. But William wasn't worried. Whether cameras were pointing at him or not, he would do his duty as he always had. The sun was setting over Buckingham Palace as William marched out for his evening shift. Tourists still gathered with their cameras, but there was a different feeling now. The incident had reminded everyone that behind the ceremonial uniform stood a dedicated soldier, protecting not just a palace, but centuries of British tradition. Part 7, Resolution and Aftermath. 1 month after the incident, James Chen sat in his small apartment in Vancouver, staring at his computer screen. His inbox was full of messages from news organizations still wanting to interview him about what British newspapers had dubbed the tourist who learned his lesson. The court's punishment had been severe but fair, a £5,000 fine, a formal apology to Lance Corporal Matthews and the palace, and a 1-year ban from entering any royal properties in the United Kingdom. The story had become a warning tale for tourists worldwide. "I still can't believe how stupid I was," James told Mike during their weekly video chat. Mike had returned to Vancouver 2 weeks earlier after staying in London to support his friend through the legal proceedings. The European dream vacation had turned into an expensive nightmare, but it had taught them both valuable lessons. Back at Buckingham Palace, new signs had been installed: "Respect our guards, zero tolerance for harassment." Tourist guides now use James's story as a warning during their tours. "Remember the Canadian tourist," they would say, pointing to the spots where everything had happened. James's social media accounts told a different story now. Gone were the posts about messing with the guards. Instead, his latest update was a long, thoughtful message about respecting other cultures and traditions. "I learned that what looks like entertainment to us is someone else's important duty," he wrote. The video of the incident had reached over 10 million views online. Comments poured in from around the world. Finally, someone faced consequences. And good to see traditions being protected. Tourism websites had started including specific warnings about appropriate behavior around royal guards. Lance Corporal Matthews had received a commendation for his professionalism. The palace used his example in their new training materials for guards, showing how to maintain composure under provocation. His story had inspired a new generation of soldiers applying to join the Queen's Guard. James's parents had helped pay his fine, but he was working extra shifts at the coffee shop to repay them. Every time he handed them money, he remembered the moment he threw that water bottle. "Sometimes the most expensive lessons are the ones we remember best," his father had said. The incident had sparked changes in how tour companies operated around Buckingham Palace. Many now included a short video about the guards' military background during their bus rides to the palace. These are active duty soldiers, guides explained, not actors in costumes. British newspapers ran follow-up stories about the Guards' daily challenges. Interviews with former Guards revealed how they dealt with tourist behavior while maintaining their prestigious traditions. The public gained new respect for their discipline and professionalism. James received an unexpected email one morning. It was from a London school teacher whose class had witnessed the incident. She explained how she used his story to teach her students about respect and consequences. James wrote back, offering to video chat with her class about what he had learned. The court had kept James's passport for 2 weeks after the fine was paid, ensuring he completed all required procedures. When he finally got it back, the experience had changed how he viewed travel. It's not about getting the perfect social media post, he told a local newspaper. It's about understanding and respecting the places you visit. Mike had edited their London footage into an educational video about tourist behavior with James's permission. Tourism boards from several countries contacted them about using it in their visitor guidelines. Their mistake was becoming a teaching tool for others. At Buckingham Palace, tourist behavior showed noticeable improvement. The number of incidents involving guards dropped significantly in the months following James's case. Palace officials noted that visitors seemed more aware of the guards' real military role. James kept the newspaper clipping about his court appearance on his desk. Tourists fined for disrespecting Royal Guard served as a daily reminder of how quickly poor choices could escalate. His mother had framed it, saying, "Sometimes we need to remember our mistakes to avoid making new ones." As summer turned to autumn, James focused on rebuilding his life and reputation. He started volunteering at a local museum, gaining a new appreciation for preserving and protecting cultural traditions. His experience had taught him that real respect meant understanding the meaning behind the customs we encounter. The incident became more than just another viral video. It became a turning point in how tourists interacted with royal guards and a lesson about respecting traditions in our social media age. As one palace official noted,